emotionally, has anxiety that's impacting their learning, an IEP is going to go much further and actually provide services to address those needs. Um, so we have a lot of students and that start with a 504 plan, or they're on an IEP and then they move down to a 504 plan. And one way to look at it is a 504 covers a big range of students. It gives them access to their education through accommodations. An IEP is a certain group of those students will qualify. They need more intensive services and they would actually qualify for special education.
Richard, can you tell us how can a child become eligible for a 504 plan?
So when we look at eligibility, if we go back to the law, the Rehabilitation Act, there's not a lot of guidance on what is required to be eligible. When you're looking at Section 504, though, we're looking at things that affect major life activities such as learning. So to qualify, you have to be able to show that the student or your child's learning is being impacted or affected, and you require the accommodations or a 504 plan. So what we do when we get involved is we use the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which actually is the law that structures and sets up IEPs. So we use that for a lot of guidance. So one of the things that we tell all of our families, if you're looking for a 504 plan, you should, and it has to do with academics. It has to do with social emotional. You should request a full assessment for special education. And they're going to look at all the areas of suspected disability. You're going to share, you're going to give your input of what areas you're looking at. Teachers and those working with your child are also going to have areas. They're going to give you an assessment plan and they're going to mark certain areas. Like maybe you want to look at language, maybe you want to look at speech, occupational therapy. Maybe, and then we should definitely do a psychoed assessment, and that psychoed assessment is going to look at social emotional. It's going to look at behavior. It's going to look at cognitively, where's your child at? It's going to look at get present levels academically. So we can look at the whole child and determine at that point, do they require special education, or would a 504 plan be sufficient? So whenever you're looking at now this, the difference of that would be if we're not talking about a 504 plan for educational purposes, but maybe access. Maybe you need some accommodations for sports. Maybe you need some accommodations for the extracurricular activities. We may not need to do a full special education assessment. We could just bring in and make certain requests that are going to give the student access to those types of programs.
Okay, Richard, since this is going to be very interactive with the participants, and I welcome the participants to please ask questions. The reason for this is for you guys. So it's free advice, take what you can out of it. One of the questions we have right now is which one can be useful for a high school student that is looking to go to college and they currently have an IEP?
Okay, great question. So an IEP will end when they exit, and their senior year, they should have what they call an exit IEP in the springtime. They don't actually exit off it, but they talk about taking that IEP and setting it up so it's something that you can take to university or you can take to the local college, and that would become a 504 plan. So 504 plans, there's no age limit on 504. So any learning, no matter what age, university level, you could have a 504 plan. You want to make sure that you have the extra time for tests. Maybe you want to get notes for every class, or lecture notes, or students can take notes and they can be provided. There's all types of accommodations. But an IEP is really good, but it is going to turn into a 504 after high school to go. And it's something that you should just ask the IEP team. Talk to them and say, so what do I do with this document? I have an IEP, my child's going to go to such and such college. The guidance counselor, the academic counselor, your program specialist, they should be able to help you with that. But you definitely want to keep the IEP. It just becomes a 504 later.
One thing, if I may add, with the IEP, they do have accommodations in a section in the IEP. I would highly recommend prior to graduating high school to get as many accommodations as you or your child deems appropriate for them into that IEP. Because when you go to college, the College Disability Department may give you the majority of them. They may give you some of them. It depends on how sophisticated they are and what programs they have available. So I would pile up the accommodations in the IEP with what's necessary for your child. And then when you get to the college level, because they may not offer everything in the accommodations section, at least you would get the majority of what your child needs.
Just adding to that really quick, that is very important because when they look at getting accommodations, even for, I know the California bar exam for lawyers is, gosh, they keep changing the dates because of COVID, but I think it's this week or next week. But there's a lot of students that are getting accommodations, obviously, and then they appeal it when they're denied, but they look back to the IEP. They look back to the 504 plans and universities. Did you have a pattern and practice of needing that? Did you actually have it? Or are you just applying for it now? So definitely get all of the needed accommodations in the IEP. Very important before you go to university. It'll make it much easier.
To add on to that, I know my son Jonathan, who has an IEP and went through college, Mopar College, and they gave him the accommodations. And when he left Mopar College, he wanted to go get his real estate license, and he was able to get accommodations for the real estate test. But they requested a copy of the IEP and a psychoeducational report showing, what the deficits are and why the accommodations were required. I would not throw any of that away. I would hold on to it until you get your children to a place where they're okay, even after college, at least through whatever career that they're looking for. So I would hold on to those documents. I'm going to get to another question because parents are asking. This other question is, what do you find most helpful to prevail against sovereign immunity for schools when special needs children have been discriminated against due to their disability?
Read that. Did you say sovereign immunity?
Yes.
That's interesting. So depending on what the issue is, if we're talking about IEPs, every state has accepted. So not to get too complicated here, but this goes to your sovereign immunity question. The federal government can't force things on states mainly, right? So the IDEA is a funding statute, and it says if you accept these funds, you have to be able to be sued for it. And that's the way that they get around the sovereign immunity is they've accepted money, they open themselves up to liability if they're not implementing or providing the programs or providing a FAPE. The same with Section 504, they have accepted, so you can file suit against these government agencies for violating these statutes. But the biggest thing is when you look at any type of dispute with the IDA or Section 504, usually with the 504 complaints that you want to start internally. There is the ADR process. There's the alternative dispute process with IEP stuff. You don't always have to sue to get to where you need to go. You can get good assessments, bring in outside assessments, and try to work within the system before you go outside of that and actually initiate a legal complaint.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I have another question. Parent, I have a 9-year-old who was severely ADHD, and which plan is better for her, IEP or a 504?
An IEP for sure. So if you have severe ADHD, it's definitely impacting your learning. It's impacting your ability to concentrate, to focus. So you could be looking at different placements. You could be looking at potential private schools, all being funded by the school district, the different resources that your child needs to access their learning. And a lot of times modifications, there's just a lot of busy work that they don't need to do. So definitely you would want to push for an IEP. You would want a full psychoeducation assessment to look at everything that's impacting your child's learning and then make that decision. But if it's severe ADHD, you definitely should push for an IEP.
Okay, I have another question. This one was in the chat box, so I'm going to go to it and then go back to the Q&A box. Current para, I think this is what it says, and if I misread it, forgive me. Where is it? Current para, it seems incomplete. I'm not sure. Forgive me if I don't say it correctly. Current para and told I'm not allowed to read the plans. Is that legal? Jill, if you don't mind retyping this question into the Q&A so that I can have clarity and have Richard or I answer your question accordingly, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to go to this other question. I have a child with a current G IEP in Pennsylvania that suffered a severe brain injury, concussion, with severe visual disability and symptoms, which has definitely hindered with the current virtual learning. The school recommended just a 504 with accommodations. Was this the right route?
I mean, based on what you, and I'm really sorry all that's happened. No, without looking at what, how they came to that determination, I wouldn't know. But you would want a full assessment. And I know in the literature we talk about present levels of performance. You really want to get a good understanding of where your child's performing, and then where could they be performing, and then how do we get them there, based on, if he's an IEP, special education, maybe some individualized education is necessary to get your child where they can be. I don't know what a 504 alone would do. So the question I would ask your team, your 504 team, would be, what did you base this decision on? And then you can always disagree and request additional assessments, request that the district go further. And then in the literature, there's information too about requesting your own independent assessment that's publicly funded. There's some concerns there where the district has to take some actions when you make those requests. So you should definitely read the literature, but I don't want to have the district. I really understand where the district is at and how they came up with that determination. And you don't be deterred either. For everybody, who has this situation, don't be deterred if they're offering a 504 and not an IEP. Just keep pushing, keep moving forward. For all of our cases, we rarely get students on 504. Sometimes we'll take them off IEPs to a 504 later, but usually, you can qualify minimal services. You want to track it. An IEP provides so much more protection for your child. There's so many more parent rights, student rights involved in IEP, and accountability for the school district that you should stay the course and push for an IEP.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, just I have a comment. Your video is not working. Your screen is blank. Is it possible?
It could be possible. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. We like to see you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, more questions. So a 504 is made on their senior year, not necessarily. This parent is asking, is a 504 made in the senior year?
No. So to clarify, if there's already an IEP in place, that's going to run all the way through to the end, till they graduate with a diploma or they exit the school district's responsibility, which would be at age 21 or in some places 22. So that IEP goes all the way through. Once you go to university, you take the accommodations and what you can out of that IEP, and it goes into a 504 plan for the university system or the college or anything. I mean, it's just any educational setting. But yeah, so the IEP is going to stay through graduation or you exit the school district.
Okay, this one, does a 504 plan provide the same protections that an IEP does in terms of certain disciplinary actions triggering a manifestation determination review?
Yeah, so the 504, there's not a lot of guidance. So the manifestation determination is going to come into play when a student who has an IEP is removed from a setting for a behavior incident or a host of things violating student code of conduct. And there's different things that trigger that. That's not going to be triggered with a 504 plan. There's just not the guidance. Now the district might have its own policies, and then you have a 504 plan. You would have to look also, and gosh, and I've never been asked that question. You always want to be solution focused. So if you have a 504 plan and there's a disciplinary action that's removing your child from school for say over 10 school days, does that trigger that they actually have to decide if it's a manifestation of a disability? All that falls under the IDEA. So that's all under the IEP area of law. Section 504, though, you could request it and say, hey, you're not addressing this disability, and if you think that it is a manifestation of the disability, you should be looking at getting an IEP. And one way to bring that together, if I'm being clear here, is to say, it's an eligibility decision, that they have a 504 plan, but they're really eligible for an IEP. And you're punishing the behavior, but you're not addressing the behavior. So when you look at the two things of a manifestation determination under the IDEA, right? You're looking at, was the behavior a manifestation of the disability, or did the district not implement the IEP? And those two things, and here you can argue, well, they should have had an IEP, and the 504 was not appropriate all along. But specifically to answer your question, the manifestation determination doesn't apply to 504.
Okay, this other question, one of my sons is a junior at a private school, but he has had an IEP from his prior public school with the help from, oh, cool, thank you, the Jonathan Foundation. There is an agreement between the district and private school. Today, I received a call from the district saying they want to switch him to a 504 because he is not receiving services from the district or services from the private school. The district refused to provide services once we moved to the private school. The private school will charge extra for any services we add. It seems like a catch-22.
Yeah, I got lost a little bit there in the question in the week there, but let me.
I could repeat it for you if you like. I can break it down.
Sure.
Okay, this is okay. One of my sons is a junior at a private school, but he had an IEP from his prior public school with the Jonathan Foundation's help. There is an agreement between the district and private school. Today, I received a call from the district saying they want to switch him to a 504 because he is not receiving services from the district or services from the private school. The district refused to provide services once we moved him to the private school. The private school will charge extra for any services we add. It seems like a catch-22.
Yeah, I guess just it gets complicated. He had an IEP, you said, so it's unclear if you're privately funding the private school, but they're not providing any additional services, it sounds like. Generally speaking, here's the responsibility. The school district of your resident is always going to be your local educational agency, okay? They're always responsible for at least offering a FAPE to all students. If you choose to privately place, they don't have to provide an IEP. They can provide, it's like an individual service plan. And like an ISP or whatever it's called there, and you can get some like a proportionate share of some of the services. Like families will get speech, they'll get some OT or something, but they're not going to get a full IEP if you're parentally placed private school student. Now, if the district placed there, that's different. Or if the district is contracting with that private school to place that child there, that's different. Before you ever exit a student off an IEP, the district is required to do an assessment to make that determination. They can't just say, oh, we don't think it's needed anymore. So they would actually have to do a whole nother triennial assessment in this case, have an IEP meeting and give you a chance to either come back to the district to receive those services or do those assessments, find that your child's no longer eligible and offer a 504 plan. So I'm not sure where in that process you are and how the district is involved. But if you privately place on your own, the district is out of it unless you go back and request services or request and offer a FAPE. But to answer your question, go to the district, get an offer of FAPE, have them do a full assessment, and then make the determination of what you want to do.
Thank you, Richard. This other question, if you have a school that is not helping to get your child an IEP or a 504, where should I go from there?
Say that one more time.
If you have a school that is not helping to get your child an IEP or a 504, it seems like the school's not collaborating. What should the parent do if the school does not want to give a 504 or an IEP for the child? What's the next step?
And again, going back, I was trying to see in the question if I missed something about so the question would be, did they do an assessment? Did they assess for special education and not qualify? Or do they even refuse to assess? And sometimes parents will say, hey, I want an assessment. And they just say, no, we're not seeing the problems. You really want to document though. So, and I think it's really important, and it's hard, and I say this a lot to families who get frustrated. They want to help you, they just don't know how, school districts sometimes. And I know you may not feel that because you're so frustrated. The system breaks down often with a lack of communication. Part of that communication is you being very clear of not only requesting things, but showing why. So here you would want, and I don't know if you have an SST meeting, if you met with the teacher, who's seeing the struggles? Why do they need a 504 and IEP? Bring somebody in on the education team to help support you, but write down why. What are you doing at home? Or is there a ton of stress? Is there crying at home? Is there over school refusal? Just hours doing schoolwork when it should take 30 minutes. Document those requests. Be very specific to show why you think. And it's really important. The threshold for the district assessing is really low. So pretty much whenever you request that your child should be assessed for special education within reason, they need to assess, because they can't make the determination that they don't qualify without the assessments. And so just kind of assuming what your question would be, if they say no to the assessments, I would encourage you to reach out to a special education advocate, a special education attorney in your area, and just talk about what the next steps are, because it might involve going a little bit bigger, bringing somebody in to assist you.
Thank you, Richard. If your child already has a 504, can it be changed to an IEP?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes we'll start with a 504 and we'll see that they're really not making progress. And so we need to switch it to an IEP, which means we want to bring in services. But if you have any concern that a 504 is not appropriate, you should absolutely request that they provide an IEP, which means they're going to have to do a full assessment. Generally speaking, to get a 504, they're not capturing your child. They're not doing a full special education assessment to determine that. And when I say a full special ed, you want every area of suspected deficit or need that your child has, they should assess. And so the whole team has all the information to determine, wow, do they really need additional supports and services to fully access their education? A 504 plan is an accommodation plan. An IEP is actually a remediation, a service plan that's going to provide those services to take your child where they're at here and put them over here where they could be given the right program. So definitely go to your 504 team and put it in writing. Kind of going back to the last question, why do you want a special education assessment? What are you looking for? Be clear and do not be deterred. I've had a lot of families say, I did request it, and they just kept talking me out of it. Just don't be talked out of it. Say, I want you to assess for special education and related services. List your areas of concern, document it, and just keep asking and keep asking. And then eventually if you go nowhere, then you can talk to an advocate or somebody.
And to piggyback on that, the school district, there's a law under IDEA, child find, and they're obligated to assess, identify, and seek any and all children with specific disabilities. And so they have an obligation to help your child. So I do agree with Richard. If you're hitting a block wall, it's time to call in an advocate or an attorney to help you navigate that situation better. Here's another one. For twice exceptional students, do you find that GT services coincide well with a 504 plan? What about the IEPs?
Yeah, for our 2E kids, we really work hard to get them qualified for an IEP. The benefit in an IEP, and for a lot of the 2E kids that we've worked with, a lot of it's ADHD. Sometimes it can be, they can be high functioning autistic, but it really goes in that, we can identify a learning disability with the 2E, meaning that they have really high cognition, but there's certain areas academically they're way underperforming, to the point where the school might find like, well, they're average. Let's just say you have a 130 IQ and you're performing down in the standard score of 90s in a lot of the areas of academics, with 100 being the mean. So they're still average amongst their peers. And something to remind your school is they might be average, but their potential is way up here. They're way underperforming their potential. And because of that, we need to address those areas of deficit. Why are they struggling? And to do that, you really need an IEP. 504 plans, if parents are comfortable with them and they feel the accommodations, maybe cutting out some of the busy work that can be distracting, and just focusing in and modifying might be enough. But there's usually something going on that's causing them to underperform, and an IEP would be the appropriate document or the appropriate educational program to address that.
Okay. I would like to know if a child has IEP since elementary and the IEP has been somewhat implemented, but your child is now in junior high school and still struggling to read, what can be done? Parent feels that there is more needed. What can be done? Parent suspects that the child has dyslexia as well.
That's tough, and I'm sorry that you're seeing that, because that's got to be very tough on your child. A lot of times, our students with dyslexia or other learning disabilities have anxiety. What generally happens is, from my experience and everything that we've seen, is in elementary school you get a lot of support from your teacher. There's typically one teacher. Sometimes they'll break out into other groups, but we have one teacher each year carrying them through, and they know that student well and they're able to accommodate. Once they get to middle school, though, they have multiple teachers. They typically are going to have executive functioning issues. They're going to have difficulty organizing, difficulty staying on track. And then what was accommodated in elementary is really gonna show once they're in middle school. So one of the things that you have to look at is you have to identify, does your child have dyslexia or not? And you can request, again, goes back to the assessment, request the district do a full psychoeducation assessment, have them do a speech and language assessment to look at the language skills, have them, if you have anything, and I'm kind of going wide here, but even, an occupational therapy assessment can look at certain areas such as, sensory processing. Are they affected by their environment? Is that impacting their ability to concentrate? If something's going on over here, if the light's too much, it can really matter. So you just bring in the specialist, get a really good understanding of where your child's at, and then you can develop a program to address their deficits. And if they're way underperforming in reading, this is a sad statistic, but it doesn't have to be you. If you're below grade level by fourth grade, there's a 75% chance, or whatever the number is, that you're going to remain below grade level all the way through school. And we teach reading in our schools generally through third grade, and then we use reading to teach. So if they're still performing at the second, third grade reading level, I'd be really concerned. But there's really good remediation programs. There's a lot of great programs. I'm not sure where you're at and what's available, but there's tons of educational specialists that deal with dyslexia, that deal with other learning disabilities. And what you want the school district to do is two things. You want them to put a good IEP in place so your child has access to their learning now. And then you want them to put a good remediation program in place to take your child where they should be, where they could have been had they actually identified this sooner. And you want to close that gap. And you can make years of progress in months. But you definitely need to get the assessments that show where your child's at and what they need.
Thank you, Richard. To piggyback on that, there's also, if your child is in junior high to high, there's assistive technology assessments where they have devices and software to help the child access grade level curriculum. To do the testing and get answers is really important. And then the IEP team can better address the needs of the child. This next question is, IEP and MET recommend services in all areas, but I want only one service. Can my child continue in her IEP, or can I request only a 504 for speech?
Yeah, we come across this too. And, some families, they don't actually want the district to get involved in stuff. So I practice in California. Every state, a lot of the federal law, which is the IDEA, gives states a lot of authority or flexibility on adjusting things. I know in California, you can partially consent to an IEP, so you just consent to what you want. However, in California, there was a case that came out that if it's a material piece of the IEP that you're not consenting to, the district may actually have to file a lawsuit to get you to consent, because they feel that that's what your child needs. Now, you can always not consent at all. And I'm not sure in the other states how that's actually applied, but you don't have to consent to special education. And if you don't want an IEP, I don't want an IEP. I'd rather have a 504 plan, what can we do there? They should be able to work with you. The IEP does have a lot more protections. But if there's certain things that you don't want in the IEP, just ask your team. Can I just consent in part? I know in California, you'll see on the bottom of the IEP, it says, I fully consent, I partially consent, I do not consent. And then you can put why. But just talk to your IEP team and kind of, just have a good discussion of what you would like to see for your child and ask them, can it be in an IEP this way? Or can I have it in a 504 plan? I think communication there is going to really help you.
To piggyback on that, can a 504 have a speech service in it?
Yeah, whenever there's a service, it's almost a guarantee that you can get an IEP because they're actually providing a services or a service. And the point of a service in an IEP is to have goals, have a service, track progress, make sure you're meeting those goals. You definitely have goals in an 504, but you're right. If it is a service for the school district's own liability, it should be in an IEP.
Okay, this one, here's another question. Okay, I have a 5-year-old with cerebral palsy. Forgive me if I ruin this word. It's a diagnosis, polymicrogyria, epilepsy, and autism. He has an IEP. How could he get accommodations for attendance? We struggle due to side effects of the medication.
So accommodations for attendance mean like he's missing a lot of school.
He's got medical, yeah, he's got some deficits, and he's missing school because the medication is probably making him groggy, and he's unable to get up. So
so this is where you have to be very creative and really work with the team. You need to show what does your child need to access their learning. And so just some examples of this, you can bring the learning in the home. And I know with COVID, I'm not sure, in some schools being open, some not, some, on virtual. But, just by way of example with students, we've had students who have been bedridden. We have had students who, have cerebral palsy and they can only go to school sometime. And we have 2 aides for them. We have a mobility aide, we have a nurse, and then we have an aide that's accommodating all their work. Whatever you need for your child to access their learning. So, and this goes back to section 504, even though you have an IEP, ADA and 504 apply for access purposes, not just FAPE purposes. And access is, what do they need to be educated as adequately as their non-disabled peers. So I'm not sure exactly what it looks like, if he can participate when he's taking meds that are making him, if he can be at school or not, but we can, he can virtually attend when he's at home. He can have a teacher come to the home when he can't attend school, but you really just need to make sure your requests are very specific to the team. What does he need to access his learning, and then put those things in place.
Thank you, Richard. This one is interesting. Can a school district refuse to enroll a transfer student into their district based upon what is in their IEP?
Yeah, so there's a couple different types of transfer students, right? So if it's a school district and it's an inter-district transfer, one of the things so to answer the question, no, they can't discriminate because a student has an IEP. But what you would have to look at is, do they have an agreement with the other school district? Is there any restrictions that's why they wouldn't take students? Sometimes in inter-district transfer as well, parents have to work in the district, or they have to be employed by the district, and obviously their kids can come. But if they're discriminating and saying no solely because of an IEP, that's a big no-no, and they're in trouble for it. So one of the questions you ask them, well, what are your inter-district transfer policies? And can I get the MOU, the memorandum of understanding between the 2 districts? You can always do a public records request act, which is a really good way to get public documents and just see how many students from District A are in District B. Send it to both districts under your rights to access public records, and get that information, because you want to see. And then you can, is there a ton of students? Are they really limiting the incoming students? And it's different for every district. So, but to answer your question, no. If the IEP is a sole criterion of why they're refusing it, they violated the law.
Thank you, Richard. This next question is, when I started as a para in a new school district after 15 years of not being a para, where I was allowed to be part of an IEP meeting and have access to plans, I was denied. Is it legal? Plus, I'm currently in the process of having a child tested for Asperger's, so I want to know who's allowed to access the plan for transparency.
So para, mean like you're a para educator and an aide, and you
That's
don't have access to the records, is that? Raja, is that what you're?
I'm assuming paraprofessional, maybe, because it's just PARA. I'm assuming it's a paraprofessional, someone trying to help a family.
Yeah, so if you're hired by the district to be a paraeducator, that's a very interesting question. So, and again, so I'm going to make an assumption here. If you're a paraeducator working with a child and they don't give you access to the IEP, that's obviously problematic for implementation purposes. However, school districts will generally not have their paraeducators they're not accountable for the goals. They're not accountable for a lot of stuff. It might have a service. You might be a service provider, but it's usually the teacher, the supervisor, the paraeducator that will go to IEP meetings that's in charge of monitoring the program. But, parents, there are, HIPAA laws and, and stuff like that about privacy, these records, but parents control that. And as a parent, if you want, I would, sometimes we have districts, we request that everybody who works with the child initial the IEP and give it back to us because we want to see, we assume that, we're hoping that they've read it. That's the intent of getting them to initial, but we want to make sure that it's given. It's really important that everybody understands what's in the IEP. So whenever a district hides access or doesn't turn it over, the bell should go off. That's problematic. I would really bring the team together and ask and try to get them say, hey, we want everybody on board here. What can we do? But the parents would control that.
Thank you. This next one is, what would you do for a child with food allergy or celiac disease? How do you get accommodations for those?
Yeah, this is a good 504 plan accommodations because whatever, if there's allergies or anything like that, you need accommodations to get to school, to access the learning. The school really needs to do it. Do you have something to say on that one?
Well, I also know you can add a medical plan, implementation plan, because these allergies, some of them is life-threatening. And I had a student that had peanut allergy and so severely life-threatened by it, could not be in a school that has it had to be allergy-free. It was a NPS placement. And we had to do a medical plan and attach it to the IEP. So you can actually request that and request your doctor for the child to fill out the medical plan and say what the do's and don'ts are. And so God forbid there's an emergency on the school and the parent's not there, at least the school would have a go-to and how to help your child until you're able to get there.
Absolutely. And that could be attached to like a medical plan, a health plan. The school nurse will get involved. They'll talk to your child's doctor. They'll get all the information. They'll document it. And like you made a good point, Raja, too. Even if they can't secure a placement for your child, then you got to look at alternative placements. And if they can't secure that, they could potentially have to pay for a private school. It gets really difficult when allergies are so severe because a lot of schools don't want to take the responsibility, but they have to keep your child safe. Sometimes, we have it as simple as no food in the classroom, and you feel bad for the other kids, but the child can't have any food around, and that's just how it is. And then anytime that there's an event, what happens is it starts breaking down. People start forgetting. They don't take it serious. You always have to stay on top of it. But you're right. The health plan, the medical plan is a really key piece here.
Thank you. Here's a good one for you. Why assessment process is different for African American students?
So, and again, I'm going to go to California on this one. I think this was a California.
It was a California law. I don't know if it's because I do advocate nationally, and some of the schools I've gone to nationally, it's irrelevant, but for California, it's very relevant. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, the Larry P case. It's been a little while since I've looked at this, but what happened back in the 80s was the IQ testing were identifying African American students at a higher level of being cognitively impaired. And back in the 80s, as mental retardation is the word that they use. So there was a court case and a big injunction, and they said, stop doing IQ tests on African American students. They're not normed for that population, meaning that they weren't written with the African American community, their culture, history, background, all that stuff. So they're just getting flawed results, and school districts were placing them out of the gen ed setting. It was a mess. So the court came in and stopped it. What the CDE has done, the California Department of Education, is they've come in and just adopted that injunction, and they said, okay, we're just not going to use IQ tests. There's a pro and con to this. There's alternative IQ tests that they get cognitive potential by looking at different things and not going straight to the IQ test. A couple ways around this, because all the tests have been normed now. The IQ tests are unless you're a culture like you come from, say, some place that's just that it hasn't been normed. I'm not even going to throw a name out there, but some really far away country that isn't westernized at all. Our IQ test may not work. We may not get clear data, but the IQ tests have. So you can get private assessments, and districts will push back on this, but there's nothing in the law that requires, and we've disagreed with districts' assessments specifically because we want to look at the IQ. We want to look at the potential of this student, and we'll get the district to pay for that outside assessment. Again, it's a battle. They'll fight. Sometimes districts will cross out any outside IQ testing because they just misunderstand the law. So my personal view is the CDE really needs to deal with this, and they're not. But as a parent, you should really push your district then to fund an outside assessment, because you have every right to get the same assessments that everybody else gets. And it's completely frustrating.
Totally agree. Thank you, Richard. This one is, why would a parent not want an IEP? Is there a disadvantage versus a 504?
No, I know that there's a stigma sometimes when we hear the word special education, we think, we get thoughts of what that means. It's really not that. So the law is you get an IEP, which allows you to get special education and related services. Some of our kids on IEPs, like you said, they're twice exceptional. They get related services. The IEP provides you so much more protection, where if the district, if you're not seeing progress, you have so many more rights that you can leverage to push the district to do the right thing over a 504 plan. But my thought would be where parents like, oh, I just don't want that. I don't want that. And we worked with families where they don't even tell their child that they have an IEP. And they're like, oh, and then when they get old enough and they start seeing this, they're like, oh, we don't know how to approach it, that they're in special education. But students with IEPs are in general education. They're going to specialize, classes and programs. You can do so much. But if there's anything that your child needs service-wise, they should have an IEP and not a 504.
Thank you, Richard. This one, my son has an IEP currently, but was evaluated and missed it by 2 points. I'm scared to have him off an IEP and only in a 504. Advice on what I should do. I'm assuming missed eligibility by 2 points.
Yeah, I wonder if they're looking at one of those scores, like the scaled score for like speech and language, I think is one where you need to be below like the 7th percentile. And maybe they're talking, so the district can't have any just.
It sounds like they're trying to exit him. He has an IEP currently, but was evaluated and missed it by 2. And I'm scared to have him off an IEP and only on a 504. He may have both.
Yeah, it looks like they want to put him back on a 504 from the IEP. So if it's an exit and they've assessed and he missed it for whatever area you're referencing there, the normal response would be to get a second opinion and ask the district for an independent educational evaluation, which is publicly funding that assessment. Now they have 2 choices, and this is in the literature. They can agree to fund that outside assessment, bring some other eyes in and take a look, or they would actually have to go defend their assessment. And that would actually, they would instigate a lawsuit. Or you could just go privately pay. Just go take that assessment that the district had and pay somebody to take a look at it, see if they want to assess in additional areas. It's really difficult. You have stay put rights with an IEP, which means you don't have to agree not to have the IEP. And if they want to override that, they would actually have to file suit against you and go to an administrative law judge and say, hey, here's why this student doesn't qualify. We want to take them off an IEP. That gets very expensive. So you have the upper hand now, and I would work with the team and say, hey, I don't disagree. I'm still seeing all these areas of concern. I would really like you guys to further assess in these areas. And this is why the IEP is important. Really communicate with the team, but you don't have to agree.
Thank you. This other one is, I have a 5-year-old in kindergarten that was diagnosed with ADHD this year, and I believe he may also be ODD. I have not started the 504 discussion with the school yet. How would you recommend I start the process, and what should I do to prepare for this and educate myself so that I can be the best advocate? That's such an awesome question, because parents, you are your sons and daughters' best advocates, and nobody knows your children better than you.
No, that's absolutely true. And it's, you're seeing this stuff early on. There's a great book, and maybe, Raj, I don't know if you guys, I think it's on your resource page or, the Jonathan Foundation's resource page. It's Rights Law.
Mhm.
And it's Rights Law. It's the last name of Pete Wright, who's a retired special education attorney. And he has a great website. I think him and his wife run it. A lot of stuff on there. So it's rightslaw.com. It's WRIGHTS. Rightslaw.com. There's a book on there that's From Emotions to Advocacy. And that book, From Emotions to Advocacy, tells you, and it's written, it's a really good book for all parents getting into this, and they want to learn how do you take your emotions and how to become a really strong advocate. It talks about the process, letters to write, what you should request. You should definitely push for an IEP. You shouldn't push for a 504. You should get a lot of accommodations. You should get some early intervention in place here. And you should just build and work with your IEP team over the years to help give your son access to his learning. But go check out that book. I think that's going to help. It would help every family, but especially you, since you're just starting the process.
Oh, Omar just posted it on the chat. Thank you, Omar. He put the link for Rights Law in the chat box. Excuse me. The next question is, my daughter has a 504 for anxiety. She has since been diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia. The school will only acknowledge her ADHD. My goodness, we are fighting to get them to do a full evaluation. Should I tell them I want an IEP for her ADHD? Seems like they are just trying to add the ADHD to her 504. Is there a sure way to get them to do a full evaluation? Can't get them to email me back about the full evaluation. So it sounds like she's got both, or she wants an IEP.
Yeah, looks like that. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you have an IEP now. They want to add ADHD, but they're not going to give you an IEP.
No,
You
they
really
have a 504 for anxiety. She's
okay.
been diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia. The school is only acknowledging her ADHD, so they're not acknowledging dyslexia and dysgraphia, and they're fighting to get a full evaluation because the parents want an IEP should I tell them I want an IEP for her ADHD? Seems like they are just trying to add the ADHD to her 504.
Mhm.
They're trying to get a full evaluation. The school's not obliging. What should the
Yeah,
parents do?
it's a frustrating place to be. Stay the course. There's for eligibility for an IEP, it's a two-pronged test. You have to qualify for one of the 13 eligibility categories, and there's a lot of subcategories. So, with ADHD, you qualify under other health impairment, specific learning disability. You can look at for the learning deficits, the dysgraphia, if there's dyslexia. So you qualify for one of the eligibility categories. And the second prong is, by reason of that disability, you require special education and related services. Now, the only way we know if you require special education and related services is if they do a full assessment. So they don't have the information to deny you. So you need to be very clear of, but also remember, there's a difference between a medical diagnosis and an educational diagnosis. So when you're looking at what, like a pediatrician, or they're looking at a psychologist and they're using the DSM-5 versus the Ed Code, it's different. Also, we're not so concerned with eligibility. we're concerned with, is the program right for your child? So are they actually providing the services that your child needs to access their learning? You need a special education assessment. You need to list out what areas of concern you're seeing, what documentation you have with it, and then stay the course and say you want a full special education assessment to look at these areas. You want the district to consider your request for an IEP and eligibility for special education, and just stay the course. Don't let them, a 504 plan based on what you're telling me is probably not appropriate. We need services.
I agree with you on that one, Richard. We have 17, 18 more questions and we're at the time. I'd like to keep going. Are you able to keep going?
Yeah, I can go. If I can
A
go,
little bit more.
I can answer questions all night.
I want the parents to walk away with something vital, and these are important questions. Okay, this next one is, my son has a 504 with accommodations of extra time. I originally asked for an IEP, struggles with reading and writing, and did an evaluation and was told since he can do grade level work, just needs more practice. He doesn't qualify for an IEP. I also asked about a behavior IEP, but was told those are more for kiddos in the office every day, and that wasn't him. Can be fine for a week, and all of a sudden he had a bad day or days, but it wouldn't be appropriate. Are these statements true that if a kiddo can do grade level work, even if he struggles, they don't qualify for an IEP? And does the behavior need to be an everyday event for an IEP?
Yeah. So quickly, no, none of that's correct. What they're telling you. When you look at an IEP, it's not just academics. So the IEP provides, it's going to look at social emotional. It's going to make sure that they're developing appropriately with their peers. It's going to make sure on so many levels. So it's the whole child that we're looking at. So if they're saying, well, he's grade level, he doesn't qualify. Oh, okay. Well, that's one thing. But if he has behavior, if he has attention problems that are impacting his ability to fully access his learning, we're not just looking at grade level. Grade level is very subjective anyways. One of the things that you would want to do is document your request. What are you seeing? And continue. I know we keep kind of driving this point. They need to assess. They can't make a determination without assessing for special education. They can't. They don't have the information to do that. The other piece is when the student's at grade level, you want to see how they're actually performing. So request, you want to see their tests, their quizzes, you want to see their written work. How are they actually performing? And what measurements are they using to determine if he's at grade level or not? Sometimes what we'll see when we get the standardized assessments from like the special education, the psycho ed assessment, is you know what, they're hanging on in there. They're doing okay. But then when we actually get the classwork, we're seeing, wow, they're failing every test, they're failing every quiz, but because they can make stuff up, they're doing schoolwork, their grades average out. So there's a lot to look at, exactly why the full assessment is required before the district can make that determination. But don't be deterred. And behaviors mean a lot of things. It doesn't mean that you're disruptive. It doesn't mean that you have to be in the office every day. You have to look at how is it impacting their learning. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Richard. This other one, I turned in a paper from the doctor requesting an IEP testing for my daughter. School has not called me yet. She is currently on a 504. What is that I need to do in order for them to do testing for an IEP?
Yeah. So did they get an assessment plan, or they requested?
She turned in a paper from the doctor requesting, I guess the doctor officially on writing requested an IEP testing. It's really an evaluation for her daughter. And the school has not responded.
So in California, and again, I don't think there's anything specific in the federal law, so you have to look at your state law. They have 15 days to respond to a request for a special education assessment. Doesn't mean they have to agree, but they have 15 days to give you a prior written notice, a written response to that request. Now, what happens if they violate it? I mean, nothing, right? Unfortunately, but you need to document an email then, and just email, hey, I sent this request on this date. I want to, reiterate, we are requesting a full assessment for special education and related services. I did attach the doctor's note. These are the areas of concerns that we have. We would like an assessment plan. And then once they provide you an assessment plan, then you can sign it. And then in California, they have 60 days to finish assessing. But just reach out. Communication is key. And if they deny you, bring forth more information. They really shouldn't deny. Like I said, the threshold for assessing is really low. But just keep that communication open. Don't take a lack of response don't read into it. They could just be busy. It depends who you're sending it to, and not to get too far off on this question. Principals oftentimes aren't the best people to bring this stuff to. They're the manager of the school. And I've talked to teachers, I've presented to teacher forums where they say, gosh, our principal told us that we don't refer any student for special ed, that we can handle everything. That's insane. So what you want to do is loop a district special ed person in. Obviously you're a teacher, but oftentimes teachers aren't strong enough to be able to request special ed. Even though the law says that teachers should be able to refer and they have to assess, my experience is they're not in a position to be strong enough to override their administrator says, no, we're not doing it. So they have a special ed department, find out who the special education director is and include them and just keep pushing.
It's the squeaky wheel again. Had enough of that during my trials and tribulations with my own two sons. This next question. Due process hearings allow remedies for private tuition reimbursement, but I wonder about remedies for families who go to another public school district to seek FAPE. Can families be compensated for moving expenses, rent in order to attend school in the more appropriate district?
It's really
question.
interesting.
Yeah.
It is. The IDEA has limited. There's no compensatory damages as we typically in law consider compensatory damages, which are there's no pain and suffering, there's no moving expenses. If you change districts, you change the LEA, the responsible district. So they're done. This district is done. Now I love being creative and thinking outside the box and trying to tie it in that you're forced to do that. Generally speaking, though, your damages under the FAPE IDEA issues are limited to compensatory education damages. That is makeup services to put your child in the position they should be in, had the district actually done its job. Now we do, like you said, we do recover private school placements. We recover, transportation. We recover, hotels and food when you have to travel for assessment. I mean, we can get wide on actually recovering costs, but moving expenses, I think that would be really difficult. It really just depends how atrocious the other setting was. Now, there was a case where a student, I can't remember where they lived. They were either like in the Santa Barbara area, may have been there, and they actually paid for an apartment down because that's where the child went to school, a private school. And I think the court distinguished between not paying for the apartment, but paying for the private school. But you can be creative as long as you can tie those damages in. It would be a hard fight. And I'm not sure what attorney and what levers you have, but you would definitely need to talk to an attorney about that question.
Thank you. For confirmation, 544 plans, where am I? 544 plans don't get a full psychoeducational assessment, but IEP plans do. What does the assessment or evaluative process look like for a 504 plan?
Okay, so let me be clear here. There is no assessment required for a 504. There's nothing in the law. So what we always do is you're going to request a special education assessment. You want the team to do a full special education assessment. Based on that assessment, it can then go towards the IEP, or it can find not eligible and discuss a 504. But the only assessment you should get is a full assessment for special education. Only then can they determine which plan to put them on. But the district might do haphazardly do an assessment and call it a 504 assessment, but nothing in the law, there's no guidance, there's no structure to any type of assessment for a 504 plan. So they confuse that. If they're going to offer a 504 plan, then immediately you request a full assessment for special education and push them and just be honest. Say, well, with this information, we can at least then scratch off eligibility for an IEP if you guys really think that, but let's assess first and get that information.
Thank you. I have a second grader with ADHD. How do I start the process with trying to get an IEP? Would that be a school counselor or social worker?
Yeah, so you want to just request, you want to talk, you want to talk to the teacher, see if the teacher can make the request is one way. Like I said, in the law, and I can't remember if this is federal or just California law in the ed code, but you're going to just request. So the teacher can make a referral for special education, and then the parent can make a referral for special education. So you just make a referral. I would ask, and you can talk to the principal, or you can go online, find out in your district who the special education director is. And I would send an email to the special education director. I would copy the principal, your teacher, and I would make a specific written request of the concerns you're seeing, and be very clear that you're requesting a full assessment for special education and related services because of these concerns, and you look forward to receiving an assessment plan and having an IEP for that determination. And go back to that other question about from emotions to advocacy. It's going to tell you how to write this, how to what information you should put in this request.
He's referring to the rights law, right? Rights law.
Yeah,
the link that Omar put in the chat box is what Richard is referring to.
Loop more people into your conversation. Copy them, but go to the special education department. Don't keep it within the school site. It'll get lost there.
Thank you. With it being so many types of IEPs, which assessment should be asked for a 9-year-old who has been diagnosed with ADHD?
So we always cast a wide net with assessment. So as you were talking with our child, find, when they're looking these first assessments, you're really looking at all areas of suspected disability. Sometimes we start small, and then once we get into the assessments, we realize further assessments are warranted once you really understand their needs. But there's, again, that book's going to share a lot of this information from Wright's Law. But you're looking at a psychoeducation assessment. The psychoeducation assessment is done by the school psychologist. That's going to be the big assessment. It's going to look at behavior, social, emotional. You're going to fill out tons of rating scales about your child's behavior in the home, in the different setting. The teachers will fill out these rating scales. Your child will actually take written assessments and get standardized scores. And then you got to look at, if you want to go wide, is there language? Is there speech? Is there any deficit or any concern there? And OT, I know we think of OT with writing, which is true, fine motor, gross motor skills, any mobility, any writing issues. And they take assessments, or they look at pictures and they have to copy the picture. We're really trying to get how they perceive, I know I'm throwing a lot out here, but all of the processing, your eyes, how are your eyes processing, your ears, how are your ears processing? We assess all these things. So you can ask the team, here are my concerns. What assessment should we do? The most common assessments are a psychoeducation assessment, a speech and language assessment, an occupational therapy assessment. Then we go out wide, like Raja, you mentioned before, an assistive technology assessment. We'll look at auditory processing assessments. We'll look at vision therapy assessments. We can go wider, but the psychoed is the big one. And then sometimes we have to go wider from there, but bring your concerns to the team and see what they say. But they can't just say no. It has to be in all suspected areas of deficit is what they're looking at.
The standard psychoeducational assessment covers cognitive, social, emotional, behavioral, and academic. You start with that. After that, and depending on school records, test scores, what the parent sees the child struggles with, what the teacher sees the child struggles with, then you can go on from there and also take it into consideration the test results of the psychoeducational assessment. You can come up, maybe there's more testing that needs to be done in certain areas. So that's the basic way you start, and then it branches out from there, like Richard was just stating. Next question. Did you want to say something, Richard?
I think maybe just a few more questions.
Sure. Okay, I'll do a few more. Whatever we don't get to, we will answer them and post them. They will be answered. This one says, what do you do if you feel like your child is not improving with the IEP?
And that's a common question. So an IEP, right? It's the education program that's designed to allow your child to make access. They don't always get it right. And oftentimes you're not going to see that progress. But again, this is why an IEP is so important. You have a lot of rights and a lot of ways to push this forward. So you want to look at the goals, and you want to look at, are they achieving their goals? What data are they using? Maybe they haven't identified all areas of need. So, you know, if we got involved, we would look at, when did the district last assess? Maybe we need new assessments, or maybe they recently assessed, and then we need to look for outside assessments. You're at this stage where you need to get more information. So the IEP is not working. Now you need to answer why. And that's done through assessments, either district assessments or your outside independent assessments, to go deeper and build a better IEP.
Thank you. If a 7-year-old first grader has been diagnosed with sensory processing and mild ADHD, is an IEP or a 504 plan most appropriate? Virtual learning has made it difficult to truly assess whether these issues will affect academics versus just environmental. In-person looks very different than virtual.
It does. You know, we always push for an IEP, and because it's just the better. It gives you a full understanding and the protection. And when you're looking with ADHD too, as they get older, you're going to see executive functioning. You're going to see those type of deficits, how they organize, how they plan, how they access their learning. They're going to need supports. Accommodations are not enough. They're going to need support of a resource teacher. You know, there are some really good programs out there that provide intervention, and I would push the district to provide outside intervention to address these weaknesses, even the sensory processing. There should be services for that. It's going to be outside of the school district most likely. So an IEP is definitely the right document. Again, just based on the information that I have, but I would push for that.
Thank you. This one, my child has a 504 plan, tested and qualified dyslexia in 2019 in Texas. But during our quarantine, I worked with her one-on-one, and I see her struggle in math and ELA. Should I ask for a full evaluation, or should I request more accommodations? 504, is there a limit?
Yeah, so
504 is their limit, I'm sorry.
um, yeah, I know Texas, what I've heard is it can be a little bit difficult with the IEPs.
I actually flew to Texas and attended an IEP and advocated. It was awesome.
It was a great team.
It was great because I was prepared, and in the beginning it was difficult, but then they collaborated with me and the student got quite a lot of services.
And I think you hit on something, because you're going to be prepared. You're going to bring the information. So kind of going back to what I said, the team wants to do the right thing. They don't know how sometimes, and you got to get a yes person. And that's, and obviously, Raja, you're a wonderful advocate of walking through. So how do you get them to yes, right? You walk through what's going on. Now, in this case, I don't know how many grade levels or how impacted your child is with dyslexia. It goes back to that two-pronged test. They may qualify, but do they require special education? So typically with dyslexia, and because it's going to cause continued problems, and you're going to see increase in anxiety, more frustration with learning, they should have an IEP. But it's not just an IEP, it's remediation. And the districts will often say, well, what do you mean by remediation? And obviously they know we're not talking about continuing just to be in the general ed curriculum. We're talking about remediating those deficits, getting them so it's not a deficit anymore. And that's where the service comes in. So definitely I would request a full assessment for special education, really get a good understanding of what specifically processing deficits your child has that's impacting and causing the dyslexia, so you can get in there and address them. And there's great outside agencies that can do that. And there's some really good resources. And like Raja said, work with the team, share your concerns, and ask for, what are we going to do about this? But what are we going to do about this? How is a 504 plan going to address this? How is a 504 plan going to address this? And it's not. And you really need to get those special ed assessments.
I would also add to do like an academic review. I usually do, for me, I do like a forensic study, but that's me. So you do an academic review of maybe the past 2 years of how the child is progressing or regressing in all areas. And you use report cards, you use teacher comments, you use
Yes.
what you're experiencing with the child at home, and what the child is frustrated with. And so you bring all this prepared into the IEP and with the psychoeducational assessment, and you go from there. So don't be limited just to one thing. Do a complete academic review for the past 2 years academically. How has your child been performing or not? And bring that to the IEP.
Well, just really quick, that's a really good suggestion. It's really good because then you can ask the team members, like the teachers, you have the documents, you said this on the report card, you documented this concern that you saw, like, where are we at now? Has that been addressed? You're going to, by going through those documents, you're going to learn a lot of information from the school's perspective of how your child's learning. And that should help you, at least push forward here.
Okay, this other one, how many more questions you want to answer? I want to respect your time, Richard. You tell me, and then we can
You want to do two more questions?
2 more questions. Okay, are charter schools supposed to follow 504 IDEA IEPs just like public schools?
Yeah, so charter schools are public schools, and they're either tied to your public school district, and that's who chartered them. So they may be, yes. And then at least out here in California, a lot of charter schools have broken off from their local educational school district, and they become either a coalition of charter schools, but they all have their own special education local plan area that they belong to. And yes, they accept federal funds. So it might be one school, but they run like a school district. They have to implement and provide everything just like a public, your typical public school would. And that means offering an IEP, bringing in all services. The problem that we see with charter schools, and I really like charter schools, and for some of our students who really struggle, charter schools have been so much more flexible and creative with IEPs, but obviously they're limited in resources. So it's really difficult. And what I've seen is some parents, they go to an online charter school, but they want all this in-person services because that's what the child requires. That's fair. The law requires it. You can fight with the charter school, but there's different schools that you could go to that would probably better serve your child. But charter schools, yes, and unfortunately we filed a lot of complaints against charter schools just to get them to do the right thing and follow the law.
Thank you. 2 little questions, and then I will call it an evening, and then you and I will go over the balance of the questions that are not answered, and I will have Amar post them and send it to all the participants. Okay. I just think these 2 are important. One is says, all that you're talking about sounds necessary, but it also sounds very, very expensive. Where does the funding come from for these 504 IEP services?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you think expensive to fight and get, or expensive for the school?
I'm assuming, when you do a psychoeducational assessment, and they do a speech and language assessment, and then there's speech and language deficits, who pays for this? I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, and if this person's wrong, please let me know in the chat box. But it sounds like do the parents pay for the services that the school provides, or does the school provide for the services that they're providing for the children? I'm just going to venture out to, I'm assuming that's what the parent's trying to say.
Yeah. So the idea is, at least under the law that implements the IEP, if it's educationally necessary and it's in the IEP, the school has to provide it. So the whole point of the IEP, and we went into this in some of the literature as you read it, is they have to provide a FAPE, a free appropriate public education. And that free part really, it has to be at no cost to parents. And that's how the law looks at it. So if you can get it and show that it's necessary, it's in the IEP, it has to be no cost. I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing what the law says about the resources that the schools will do. They'll assess, they'll provide additional services, and the law really does work. At its best, it's amazing getting the services that your child needs. And the schools get a lot of funding. There's a lot of separate funding for the special education side. There's a lot of federal funding. The IDEA is a funding statute. While it's way underfunded, I think Congress promised like 40% funding, and they've never gone over 25%, I think, of actually giving the funds. But there's a lot of money out there if it's to be used correctly. And so the services shouldn't cost. Now, unfortunately, there is a cost to families if they have to go privately pay for assessments or pay for private school and seek reimbursement. The inequity in the law is just devastating. If you can privately pay and then seek reimbursement, it's a much easier journey, and it's really heartbreaking. But working in collaboration with the team, Roger, you had a great experience going out to Texas, working with the IEP team. They will do what's right. If you know, and it's just,
If you're educated and prepared, they will. If you're not, they're going to play with you. That was my experience in Texas and Seattle, the same thing. And you just need to do your homework, do your research, put a book together and, of, you know, all the report cards, all the evaluations, the standardized testing, teacher comments, and historically look back and see, is there a common denominator amongst all these documents? And that's your red flag. And if you go back to the school and you say, here's my homework, here's what I did, here's what IDEA 2004 Act says, and that link is in the documents with Richard's presentation that you guys downloaded, and it has a world of information available to you. If you're prepared, they will collaborate. If you're not prepared, they're going to say, you know, whatever their budget is, because it's all about budgets, how much they're going to give, but they'll limit it according to whatever the principal states that this is what they're going to give for this family. So it's very political, and it's very difficult, and it's extremely frustrating and very emotional. So just be prepared when you enter these IEPs. This is the last question. And then Richard and I will answer the balance of the questions, and Omar will post them. We'll send notifications. This one says, my child has an IEP and I want him evaluated for dyslexia. The school said that they have to wait 3 years to reevaluate. Is this true that I must wait 3 years for an evaluation?
no, it's not true. So going back, the threshold for assessing is really low. So what the law would say is the district needs to assess um, every 3 years, unless agreed upon, you know, between the district and parents to assess sooner. So they absolutely, now there's some assessments they're not going to assess right away, but if they just assess or they recently assessed, you should, and again, there's things that come up with this, but you may want to think about asking them to privately assess, to get those IEEs publicly funded. So if you disagree with their assessments, then you request that they publicly fund those outside assessments. You get to choose the assessors and bring it to the IEP team to reconsider what's going on. Now there's potential consequences there, and it's in the literature where the district may have to initiate a suit. But to answer your question specifically, the district doesn't have to assess, but you can agree together to assess more frequently than every three years. Now, if you did hit a roadblock there, your option would be to just, you know, file a lawsuit against the school district to get them to assess. But I think that if you work with them, and one way would be to say, hey, you know what, if you're not going to assess, we're going to have to request these outside assessments, but we'd rather just have you to, you know, to reassess. And I kind of throw in this multiple angles here, but the other, do you really want the district to reassess? If they assess and you weren't happy with it to begin with, you may want to look to an outside assessment, that independent assessment, because those outside assessors are going to go deeper to really fish out what's going on.
Thank you, Richard. We went almost a half hour beyond our hour. I want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you so much. We had participants from all over the country, and this is a big deal for us. The purpose of this webinar was to answer your questions. It was not a PowerPoint. It was not teaching you. It was via PowerPoint. It was supposed to be interactive, and I hope that you got something out of it that's valuable that you can take with you. And again, as I said, Omar will be posting the questions after Richard and I have an opportunity to respond to them. We'll try to do it timely so that you have them accessible to you as soon as possible. And again, thank you so much for attending this webinar.
Yeah, and just really quick, thank you to, you know, we really enjoy sharing this information, trying to get to as many questions. Stay positive. There's always a solution to be found. Work with your team, keep asking questions. And if something doesn't sit right or they're not addressing something, just keep pushing. And there's a lot of support out there. And I look forward to answering the questions that we didn't get to. So
and one other thing, we are a nonprofit and we're not asking for any money for anything for this webinar. We were supposed to hold a fundraiser, but due to COVID, it was canceled. If you're able to, we'd appreciate any donations. No, doesn't matter what the domination is. Every little bit helps. I appreciate the participants. Thank you so much, Richard, for being part of the board of the Jonathan Foundation. Thank you, Omar, for moderating and helping us out technically. Omar is my son. He is a 504 student, and he's a huge success, as is Jonathan, my younger son. So appreciate everybody's participation. Have a blessed day, and reach out if you need anything. We're here to help. Thank you.